going to be moderating, and he is a senior reporter with Outlier Media. He covers housing, real estate, development in the city. And then we have all these different microphones. Do we need another chair mic?
No, I can just stand here.
Okay. Oh, yeah, that seems,
Yeah.
you can be the new me. Do you want to introduce the people, or would you like me to do it?
They can introduce themselves.
Oh, I like
would be
that.
best.
Yes, okay, well, we have Farrah Wilder and Dr. Richard Smith here, who will give us an overview of their backgrounds, and then you guys can get into it. So thank you all.
Do you want to take a seat? Get cozy. Thank you, everybody. We're going to be talking about issues around gentrification, which a lot of people have very strong feelings about. So let's just say I'm happy I'm asking the questions. Yeah, so we're going to do our best today to define and then figure out ways to measure and mitigate the impacts of gentrification. And yeah, maybe the panelists could introduce themselves and talk about who they are and their work. Rick, since you're closest, do you want to go first?
Hi, I'm Rick Smith. I am a professor and associate dean for research at the Wayne State School of Social Work. And I've been doing research on housing and community development. And I used to work at HUD. Actually, and same as Arthur Jemison in community planning and development. But that was 20 years ago.
Farrah Wilder, the executive director of the Fair Housing Center of Metropolitan Detroit, and I come to this work from having worn a lot of different hats. I originally was a civil rights attorney in the Bay Area of California. I'm from here, moved out there, worked at a nonprofit and for the federal government in education and employment, then became a real estate agent, went and did fair housing and diversity in the realtor world, and now I'm back in my hometown, and that was in California, back in my hometown. But when I left, Detroit looked a lot different than it does now, so I definitely have that particular lens, and also was doing real estate in a market that was rapidly gentrifying, which is Oakland, California.
Great, thank you. So I think most people have in their head a basic definition of gentrification, something like an investment in a city or a neighborhood that results in displacement. I'm wondering why folks should care about this, I guess at a basic level. What are the negative impacts of gentrification on those who are displaced? Maybe Rick, do you want to take that?
Yes. So there are negative impacts, and we've been talking about them. We've been talking about foreclosures. We've been talking about evictions. I don't think we've explicitly talked about the mental health impacts, not just of displacement, but of living in a neighborhood that is changing. What you get are a loss of social ties. You see the tax bill go up. You see your neighbor's rent go up. And that creates stress and anxiety and depression. And that was one of the studies I did that whether you were low income, whether you were high income, if you lived in a gentrifying neighborhood and you were an older adult, you experienced anxiety and depression. Now, oddly, people in low-income older adults in gentrifying neighborhoods also had a sense of overall better health than those in other low-income neighborhoods, which is to say, we certainly don't want to forget that we have a lot of neighborhoods that are disinvested. I think I'll pause there.
I do have a little something to add because I think something that I saw in the Bay Area is that, when you have a gentrifying area, usually the reason why, or what's happening is that an area is becoming desirable to people. There's more competition on every home, the prices are going up. And so what happens is that people who are living there feel like they can't afford to stay, which causes a lot of that pressure, and things are changing around them, and it's unsettling for the people there. And then you have, say, schools that can no longer find people who can afford to live, to teach there or work there or provide other services, hospitals, things like that. And so it becomes, a really significant issue. And we saw it in the Bay Area. The San Francisco public schools were at chronic levels of trying to figure out how to get teachers. And also, honestly, I've heard my whole life, Detroit's coming back. And I'm like, well, my family's always been here, even though I left and came back. And I think it's really important to value the people who didn't leave and make sure that they're cared for through this process that we can see coming. And we've seen other places where they're on the other side of it, so we can do better here.
If we're going to measure gentrification, broadly speaking, who are the people we're talking about, demographically? Income, race, any other kind of characteristics?
So I did prepare a slide on this, but
Really?
I don't think they're there. So we're just gonna, it's okay. So there's, gentrification started, the term was coined by Ruth Glass, a sociologist, and she was studying neighborhoods in London. And she noticed that middle-class people were moving into a working-class neighborhood. So that was the first observation, right? Like, oh, I was thinking I was studying a working-class neighborhood, meaning people who worked, union jobs, worked at the docks, what have you. And then suddenly, oh, there's young professionals here now. So that's a measure, right? It's what kind of job do people have? What kind of income? As that evolved, people started to think, well, if people with more money are coming to this neighborhood, then you see that in rents, you see that in home values, you see that change over time. It was actually George Gulster, who was a seventh generation Detroiter. He was a professor at Wayne State and retired to be closer to his family in Portland, Oregon. He was one of the first economists to think, hey, maybe race has something to do with this. Maybe race has something to do with the process of gentrification. In the past 15 years, now everything, scholars have really exploded, going in all sorts of different directions about gentrification. There's green gentrification, cultural gentrification, nonprofit gentrification, retail gentrification. So of those, for me, that's most compelling, and part of that is my experience living in the city of Detroit for 15 years. When I go to town halls, residents do talk about the change in the retail landscape. So I would offer that as something you could concretely measure.
I was just going to add, if there's a way to kind of measure development, I feel like that I mean, we were talking about a lot about the people, but when living in a gentrifying area, I mean, I think a lot of us can notice the difference in what a place looks like and what kind of businesses, what kind of housing is there, what it costs, which you mentioned, housing prices.
Yeah, I mean, to that point, Rick, you spoke about disinvestment also being a problem. I think ideally we would want investment in our communities. There's a lot of ancillary benefits to that, that somehow doesn't result in displacement. I don't know if that kind of thing is a fantasy or if that's possible.
Yeah, there's a technical term for that.
Okay.
It's called incumbent upgrading. Isn't that nerdy? Incumbent upgrading, which is a fancy way of saying invest in the people who are living in the neighborhood. And how do we do that? Well, we just heard from Heather, home repair, fair housing, right? Schools, workforce development. And that, you can see, you can look at data and see, okay, this neighborhood clearly had some incumbent upgrading because you didn't see a lot of people moving out. They just, got some training, services, better jobs, repaired their homes, boom.
I think it's really important to be cognizant of to kind of see gentrification for what it is, and to understand that we need to be very mindful about the potential impact. And it sounds like Detroit is maybe doing a better job than some other places, and institute programs like some of the ones that have existed in other places. They may not be perfect, but there can be a constellation of programs to make sure that people have opportunity with some of the changes that are coming, like with the construction jobs and other kinds of jobs that are coming. So I think there are ways to kind of make it beneficial for the community if we can be very intentional. And I love to hear the focus on helping people purchase the homes that they live in, and making sure that they can do that affordably and sustainably. And so I think that can be a very rooting element to where if you're looking at folks who are in rentals, there's a lot of pressure on those folks. People might be looking to buy those properties, and there's pressure maybe for those folks to leave. So to the extent that people can be stabilized in an ownership situation, not everybody's going to be an owner, so it's not to suggest that rentals are a problem or negative, but for those for whom that's a possibility, I think that can be a very stabilizing force. And we also got to deal with all the deed fraud and all of that too. But yeah.
We haven't talked too much about this in the Detroit context, so thank you for bringing that up a little bit. But where do you see it happening most here? Where do you see it potentially on the horizon?
Gentrification. I actually cheated, and that's why I brought my laptop up. So the article I wrote about gentrification was about 10 years ago. So it was old data, and I thought, I didn't have time to redo it. But fortunately, someone at Harvard had. It's horrible because I'm doing my big complaint is when someone in Boston gets a contract to do something here. But
Sorry, Rick,
I don't.
You need to get rid of some of those tabs you got.
Yeah, I know. But yeah, it's odd because it's really, it's still that mid-cork down kind of thing. The downtown core. I'm like, yeah, I know you did. It was you. Like, no, but North End, I was surprised. I'm not even. I didn't go through their methods, but yeah, North End, Atkinson congregation, one of my favorite cafes. That neighborhood has been experiencing gentrification. One of my students used to live there. Her family lost their home there. So I think it's been another thing over the decades. Gentrification has been increasing across the states by maybe I'd say let's just say doubling every decade. So the number of neighborhoods gentrifying has been increasing pretty dramatically in our lifetimes.
That was an interesting map. I got a much closer look at it than most people, but I haven't quite seen a map with that kind of gradient and granular detail. You said you don't know exactly how they're measuring it, but how do you think they are?
They pretty much did what I did, which was the indicators that I listed off earlier: change in home values, change in rents, change in job classification. So the shift from, it would be like the percent increase in professional managerial jobs held by residents. And these scholars are using when I did it, did it gentrify or not? But they did, is it super gentrified, right? Like supersize me. And then is it at risk of gentrifying in the next decade? They have that on that map too. They also had the historically affluent. So if you're just a wealthy neighborhood, I won't name which suburbs were all green, historically affluent, but you know what they are. They're not going to gentrify because they were started there. They haven't ever left.
Is that data already available for us to?
Yeah, I downloaded it in 5 minutes before this no. Over lunch. I downloaded it over lunch,
I mean, so that's all out there in the public. Is there
Yep.
anything else that we
It's census
should be
data.
collecting? It's all you can measure gentrification pretty well just with census data, you think?
Much of the research is using census data. That will not pick up the retail, and it doesn't get at the displacement question per se. For that, you need to marry in the U.S. Post Office mover data or administrative data from, say, local housing authorities to actually get at, count actual people who move, because the census, you get aggregate data. You could go in and get microdata access, but that would be a lot of work.
Okay. Let's talk about fair housing and other tools of mitigation we have. Farah, how can strong fair housing protections contribute to this issue?
So I think they're absolutely essential, because where you have competition for housing, you end up with folks who maybe, and they may not intend for this to happen, but bias creeps in as to the selection of who's going to be the tenant, who's going to be the offer that's accepted. And so I think with fair housing, you end up, first of all, mitigating a little bit of that. You also have to be trained if you're a housing provider. So it puts the issues, the potential bias on the radar. There's also a remedy when folks are experiencing discrimination that they can identify. And hopefully with disparate impact, hopefully we keep that, you can start to address issues that aren't necessarily explicitly stated discrimination, but that have an impact. And also, one of our strongest tools for making sure that folks of all income levels are housed are housing choice vouchers. And so with the fair housing laws that we have at the state level and in a lot of our communities, there are laws that say you can't discriminate against people who have housing choice vouchers. Now, those laws are not perfect. There are some loopholes and some things that we still need to address, but I think that helps people stay here as well. And so I think that these laws are absolutely critical, and they are just one more tool in the toolbox for helping to make sure that everyone really can stay here.
I should have asked you to do this before that question, but could you just sort of define fair housing laws?
Yes. So fair housing laws are laws that are at the state level, federal level, and local level that prevent discrimination based on certain categories. And oftentimes you'll hear people say protected class, and what I want to make sure people understand is that it doesn't mean for most of these groups that you're in or out. So protected class, and the federal protected classes are race, color, sex, disability, national origin. I want to make sure I get them all. Yes, religion, and source of income comes in for determining whether you qualify for a loan at the federal level, but we also have a state level source of income law. There are some city levels, including Detroit, criminal records laws, so you can't discriminate against people, there's some kinds of criminal records that you cannot use in your housing decisions, and it's different based on the municipality, and there's one under consideration at the state, and at the state level you add height, weight, sexual orientation, gender identity, and I'm probably forgetting something else. But anyhow, so these are these are categories that you can't discriminate based on. And so white folks are also protected under race discrimination. Men are also protected under sex discrimination laws. And for disability, you have to not be discriminating, but also there are some affirmative things that you need to do to make sure that disabled folks have an equal opportunity for housing.
What should someone do if they feel like they've been discriminated against in a case of gentrification, I guess. I'm not sure how to.
And we see it sometimes where that might be part of it. And I can describe how that looks sometimes. But first of all, I think the deed fraud stuff is a major thing that happens with gentrification. You know, you have folks who are seeing areas that are valuable. And, you know, there's all kinds of ways that people try to acquire property, and deed fraud is one of them. But, you know, maybe folks are targeted because they might have less access to information, people who are immigrants, non-English speakers, seniors. So folks who, based on a category that would be protected under fair housing laws, you know, maybe there's, and sometimes you can't identify that there's an intentional targeting, but you know, everybody who's coming to you is in one of these categories. Or you've got the crypto blockchain situation where investors are coming in here and purchasing these homes. Detroit still is relatively affordable compared to other places, but there's a lot of upside because we have appreciation here, and they're doing the least and not knowing all our landlord-tenant laws or our fair housing laws. And, you know, folks are coming to us because they're not getting disability accommodations and modifications. So, you know, or whatever the case may be. So that's, you know, how we're seeing it. Did I answer the question? What did you?
I asked like how someone could bring a fair housing case.
So there's a number of ways, and I would say calling us is a great way, because what we do, and we get funding from the federal government, the state, and local communities to help enforce fair housing laws. And what we do is folks call us, we do an intake, and we help advise them as to their rights. And there's a variety of different things that people might be able to do. And sometimes it's not fair housing, and then, you know, there's a housing counseling aspect where we can connect them to the appropriate resource, and it's more efficient than if they were poking around the internet and trying on their own. But we can either, and they can do this on their own too, they can file a complaint. Most of the time, we help them file a complaint with Michigan Department of Civil Rights, or we help them secure a disability accommodation or modification. It can help. And also, under extreme circumstances, sometimes we connect them with cooperating counsel, or we help them file a lawsuit. But that can be a longer process. And if the goal is really to secure housing or to address the issue, you know, sometimes it's even us picking up the phone and saying, "Is what happened here? Is there a misunderstanding? Can we help?" And so that is one thing, but they can file directly with the states. There are cities that have, including Detroit, that have civil rights departments. You can make a complaint directly to the city. They might be able to do something. If there's a real estate agent involved, they can complain to the licensing at the state department, or they can complain to the Realtor Association. That's not a great remedy in a certain sense, but, you know, you can maybe stop. They might kick you out of the Realtor Association, but you can do all of those things. So there's a variety of different things people can do.
Great.
HUD too. What I will say, and oftentimes HUD and Michigan Department of Civil Rights will cross-file with each other, and there are some additional categories that, and in particular, I would say right now, things that are considered disparate impact that are a lot more likely to be looked at the Michigan Department of Civil Rights. There's some tightening and restricting of what HUD is looking at, but HUD is also an option for folks. Plus, HUD has a longer time period, a year you have to file. You only have 6 months to file a fair housing complaint with Michigan Department of Civil Rights, which can be an issue. If you want to file a lawsuit, you may have a few years, but the problem with that is that often will cost money. We are in great need of more attorneys to help folks, whether it's funded, as a nonprofit or people doing this pro bono. Like there's a dearth of attorneys.
Great. Christine, how are we doing? I know we had a little flexibility on time, but.
Yeah, I think so. I think you have maybe another 8 minutes or so.
Oh, okay, great. We talked about creating home ownership opportunities, bringing home repair funds to gentrifying areas. I know like community benefits agreements can help codify some of those things. Is that a sufficient tool for that purpose? Is that too project-based? What else can we bring to bear to make sure that these kinds of benefits make it to residents?
It's a tool. It is project-based. I'll just, one thing that popped in my head, RX Kids and other guaranteed income experiments. If you see neighborhoods with rapid fluctuations in costs, maybe one stabilization solution could be a cash supplement program administered locally.
Yeah, I don't have an additional thing to say on that, so.
Is there an association between rising housing costs and increased competition for existing housing and the impact on existing residents? Is that like a fair housing thing that you know something about?
I do, and I think I've seen it as a someone who was selling homes, and I think we see it with folks who are calling us often in crisis. Sometimes people think it's fair housing when they can't find a house, and so they reach out to us. So what we've seen is, and it's heartbreaking because we can't necessarily get to that through a traditional fair housing lens, because who do we is there a bad actor there, but that the inventory is scarce. However, what you also see is that, I think I might have mentioned this before, when there's more options, there's a bias that creeps in. And so we do have quite a few people who reach out to us with issues of getting their vouchers accepted. And that I think is because there's options, right? And so there's bias about people receiving vouchers, like people, unfortunately. And it has a disparate impact relationship, because oftentimes the people who are receiving vouchers are more likely to be seniors, they're more likely to be people of color, they're more likely to be disabled, and other kinds of categories that would traditionally be protected under fair housing laws. And also criminal records tends to come in. Folks are like, I have options, bright line rule. It's a disparate impact. You can sometimes get to it. It's a little bit hard to make a complaint to the state under a disparate impact for a law they do not yet have, because you then have a calculation that you have to, give them, and they don't always see it the way that you do. You have to show statistically it impacts these folks more, and then that they didn't have a legitimate business reason. And so it's tough unless there's an actual law that covers that. But there are fair housing implications with the rising prices and the scarcity of housing.
I'll just say, for most of the U.S., we don't acknowledge a right to housing. I think the one exception is the city of New York. It doesn't mean that they achieve that, but many European countries say people have a right to housing, and their housing ministries work to make sure that that happens.
What would success in this issue look like 10 years down the line? If you were to show us that map, Rick, in 10 years, what would the colors look like ideally?
Well, we can't make every neighborhood historically affluent.
Right.
We'd have to have there is the not gentrified, but there's not gentrified, there's disinvested. We would want neighborhoods to be stable. Now, most neighborhoods are stable. It's like about 95% of neighborhoods don't change much. In Detroit, they do change much. That's so we'd have to come up with our own, co-create our own category, which thriving D style. I don't know.
I think since we're talking about data, there's a way to measure, how many folks, get to stay here, that don't leave. I mean, we've heard the statistic about, let's just say there's more Black folks living outside of Detroit now than inside of Detroit. That's a statistic we often hear. And I think if there's a way to kind of measure that folks who are here now are still here if they want to be. I mean, are generally here, like that there's a mix of different income levels, that, we're able to, our teachers aren't commuting from 30, 45 minutes away, all of that to me would look like success.
Great. Should we take some questions, maybe? All right. right. I mean, whoever's got a microphone, I guess we're maybe short on microphones.
Sorry,
Okay.
I have one, but there you go.
Thanks. So one of the things that's kind of always got me in kind of this conversation is that, I mean, we're talking about like the city of Detroit, which is a city that's heavily disinvested. We've lost, a couple 100,000 people, or, half the population, about 100,000 of the black population over the last decade. Not because the city's gotten nicer, right? It's because the city's been in decline, right? People are kind of moving out to the suburbs. It's just under half of the black population that lives in the city or in the suburbs right now. And so kind of what undergirds this whole conversation is that it's kind of the idea we shouldn't be making investments in these neighborhoods. And the reason that these people are leaving is because we aren't making investments in these neighborhoods. So the displacement that actually exists in the city is the displacement by decline, right? And so the investments that we get in these neighborhoods actually benefits a lot of these residents, right? You can go see property values around. That's billions of dollars in black families' pockets when they're actually able to sell their house. So I guess, I don't know if I really have a question in here, so much as that, like, how do you reconcile the kind of like long-term disinvestment that's happened in these places and continues to happen with kind of the idea that the investment that you make in these places is actually bad, and a lot of the kind of like solutions to it make investment more difficult in a place where it's already barely functional.
Opinion.
And I also do think that there are people who have lost their homes, based on the perception that Detroit is becoming desirable and is appreciating. And I do think that that is, a symptom of gentrification that we should be concerned about, because you then have, with the rising property values, the inability of folks who maybe find themselves either displaced out of a rental, which is less damaging on your credit than if you are foreclosed on. That's takes a lot longer to recover from. Then seeking housing in an appreciating area can be difficult, and there are people who do desire to stay. Of course, if someone doesn't have equity and because of disinvestment, that is a problem, and I think that's actually an injustice, and it has to do with a really terrible history of redlining and the disinvestment that came about because of that. So I don't think that's something we can ignore. But I think there does need to be kind of a balance of addressing that injustice while not making a relatively affordable place unaffordable for the people who've been here and want to stay here.
Thank you. I'm trying to be concise in my head with my question, but I guess I'm wondering, is there examples, either in Detroit or other places, where there has been success in engaging with the folks who are gentrifying or may become gentrifiers in the near future? Are there examples where those folks have been engaged in a way that helps slow the gentrification? And if so, and trying to connect it back to data, what data is compelling to those folks? Because I think for a lot of the folks in this room, right, the data about how it's impacting the folks in the community is very compelling to us, because we see it in our communities, or we see it with our neighbors or the people that we're serving. But it may not be as compelling to somebody who says, I want to buy a house there because of reasons A, B, and C, right? And so I'm wondering if there's any examples out there, and if so, what data is compelling to folks that may find themselves being part of this gentrification process.
The second half of your question, I think, is a tough one. The first half, which is case studies, examples of communities that have come together to slow gentrification. The canonical textbook cases would be the rise of the community land trusts. And the first one being Albany, Georgia. The state was going to put a freeway interchange in a historic African-American neighborhood. The neighborhood got together and someone came up with this idea, we'll put our land in a trust and we'll have a ground lease and, limit the equity of any foreseeable future. The most famous example, 2 documentaries, books, would be Dudley Street Initiative, probably 500 peer-reviewed journal articles written about the Dudley Street Initiative. And that's in Boston. One of the members of the Youth Advisory Board 30 years later became executive director after going to Dartmouth and having a career in Wall Street. Like, this is a very famous, and they did a limited equity co-op. They actually got eminent domain to seize absentee landlord properties that were left vacant, which we probably wouldn't do here, but that's sort of the textbook case.
And I think I can speak about this from someone who helped people purchase homes in a gentrifying area. I think it's important to remember that sometimes people are buying in a place because it's affordable to them and other places aren't very affordable. And so Detroit being relatively affordable compared to a lot of other places, and it's also close to a lot of people's jobs. And so, I had to balance being sensitive to, and my clients were folks who were trying to scrape in there before it became unaffordable, and they were renters in the city of Oakland, but then also people coming from elsewhere and going, this is the only place I can actually afford to buy, and I actually want to be a homeowner. I don't mean to be that way, but this is my option. And so I think, and I don't have case studies or anything like that, but being sensitive to, not necessarily saying everyone who comes from somewhere else is intending to do bad. They may be cognizant, they may not be, and making sure maybe that there is a way that they can understand the value of the existing community, the history of the existing community, even the stories of the residents. I think, to me, was helpful in Oakland. I mean, Oakland has a really strong culture, and I think a lot of people who moved to Oakland, because there was a lot of people from Oakland, and then there was people like me who weren't, who all of a sudden you get it, you're like, I'm in this place with all this history, and this is valuable and important, and these people are valuable.
Hey there. Anthony Eade again, Community Development Advocates of Detroit. I'm wondering if you 3 have any thoughts on the relationship between gentrification and zoning. We're seeing an issue right now, a tension around the city between zoning, especially folks who want to build affordable housing in neighborhoods that are zoned for single-family housing currently. The folks in the neighborhoods often say, oh, they don't want gentrification, but these developments would be affordable housing developments. So I'm just wondering if you have any thoughts on that.
Well, one thing when we did our pre-meeting for this, we thought we needed to intentionally weave in the history of segregation and how that relates to gentrification. And that's where zoning comes in. Zoning is a critical piece of the institutional mechanisms to reinforce segregation. So that is very well documented in a book called, was it The Color of
Color
Law? Yeah. And I think I saw the book talk for that in this room. It's like weird deja vu.
There's also, I think, a book by Connor Doherty about California and the real estate industries. Basically, that they instituted all of these zoning laws to make lots bigger, to to only have multi-unit properties by certain places, and also overlaying that with redlining. That's where people of color were going to be okay to live. And so I think understanding that history is important, and then also I do think like I live in a place, and I'm going to be real, like, I don't know if I'd want, like, my neighbor to build, a high-rise apartment building right next to my house. But I also think that everybody, so coming from California and being involved in policy, and there's a lot of NIMBYs in California who, they are progressive people, and they want to make sure that everybody can live there, but they don't want to change their neighborhoods and their stereotypes about people who live in, say, affordable housing or whatever your definition of that is. And so it is a very difficult thing to untangle, but I also think that there's a lot of middle ground that can be had between, building, high-rise apartment complexes, and also allowing for a little bit more infill development that eases the cost burden and allows for people. And there's examples in LA, like, if you build an ADU and you agree to rent it out to someone with a housing choice voucher, you get all kinds of help in building that unit. And that can actually cause, that changes sometimes the zoning law. Like, you are taking single family and maybe saying you can have multi-units, maybe 2, 3, or 4 units on your property. And you're also allowing for someone who may be lower income to have the opportunity to have a home.
Yeah, and a resource, if you look for, one of my mentors was John Quigley, and he wrote extensively on inclusionary zoning. This was 20 years ago, but you brought up the minimum lot sizes. It's very well documented what zoning makes housing more affordable and what makes it less affordable.
We're going to close this out with one more question, and then we're going to move to our next segment. So here, we'll give him real quick.
Uh-oh.
I'll make it easy. Real quick. So one of my favorite definitions of this comes from architect Rebecca Willis from here in Detroit, and she talks about systemic, cultural, emotional, and physical displacement, right? So a lot of convenings in Detroit, we don't necessarily just talk about physical displacement, we talk about cultural displacement. And I'm wondering, in the research, are there good indicators of cultural displacement, and how would we even potentially measure that in a place like Detroit?
I'm pretty sure I was at the panel where you and Bucky talked about this.
Probably.
The short answer is yes. I can get back to you with the actual measures used, but spitballing, it would be these service amenity measures and how that changes over time. And of course, you could always do a household survey, which we do a lot of that already, but.
What is a survey amenity?
Service or amenity. So it would be like the change. Yeah, the cliche is the number of Starbucks, the number of art galleries and what kind. But there is scholarship in that area.
I would just say, I like that question, and I don't have a particular, I don't know how that's measured, but I really like the book by Majora Carter, and I don't remember, it's like it's reclaiming your, thank you. It's such a good book because she talks about, actually, making sure that the businesses and the development that comes into that a community that is changing actually are things that are of benefit and desired by the people who already live there, not geared towards attracting people who don't already live there. Like maybe the bougie coffee shop, dog washing, cat babysitter that, the residents did not think that they needed, but that's interesting or whatever, but like kind of going, like people from here actually are seeking these kinds of things, and maybe there's a way to kind of pull people or find out.
I think we need a list, let's say, of all the books we've mentioned today, because all of us are like, what? Somebody needs to take ownership of that assignment and just get a list of all these books we all need to read. Thank you guys so much for your just great insight and really good conversation. Thank you all.